At 2 in the morning, the pillow is warm on one side. The room is dark, and you can hear the faint hum of the fridge from the next room, while your chest still feels like the day never ended. Your eyes are closed, but your mind is not. It keeps picking up one more thought, one more unfinished thing, one more conversation you wish had gone differently. And somewhere in that kind of night, many people reach for the same line: Be still and know that I am God. Most of us hear that verse like a soft hand on the shoulder. Calm down, quiet your thoughts, lower the noise. But this verse is stranger than that, and sharper. It does not show up in a peaceful little scene with candles and silence. It appears when everything is shaking. The psalm opens with mountains falling into the sea, waters roaring, the ground giving way under your feet. That is the setting. Chaos first, then one command. And the command is where the whole thing flips. Because the Hebrew word under be still is rapha. And rapha does not mean be quiet in the way people usually mean it. It means loosen, release. Let your hands unclench, sink down, stop straining. That changes everything. Suddenly, the verse is not telling you to become better at suppressing your thoughts. It is telling you to let go of them. That matters because when your mind is racing, you are usually not just thinking. You are holding on. You are bracing inside your own body. The jaw tightens, the shoulders lift, the breath gets small. And then you try to force yourself into peace by pushing harder in the exact same direction. You tell yourself to be still while still clenching every inch of yourself. But if Rapha means release, then this verse is not asking for silence first. It is asking for surrender first. And that raises a much bigger question. If the psalm begins in chaos and answers it with letting go, what exactly inside you is being told to loosen? If this kind of deep reading speaks to you, subscribe and stay with me, because the next turn is where the verse stops sounding familiar and starts sounding personal. That question matters more than it sounds, because the thing you are loosening is not just stress in some vague sense. It has a shape. You can feel it in the dry mouth, the tight throat, the little buzz behind the eyes when you are tired but still alert. And you can see part of it in the brain's rhythm. When your mind is busy sorting, fixing, comparing, preparing, it tends to run in faster beta activity. That is useful when you are answering emails, driving in traffic, solving a problem at work, or trying to make a decision under pressure. Beta helps you stay sharp. The problem is that a lot of people carry that same mental gear into prayer, into rest, into bed. The body lies down, but the mind keeps standing at the control panel with every switch still up. That is why this verse lands so differently once you hear Rapha the right way. If you treat it like an order to think better, you stay in the same loop. You stay up in the fast, bright churn of analysis. But when you begin to let go of the grip, something shifts. The brain starts easing towards slower alpha waves, the kind linked with wakeful calm, a more open and settled state. You are still aware. You have not checked out. You are simply not driving your thoughts like a team of horses in the dark. And that change does not stay trapped in your head. Your neck softens. Your breathing stops catching up high in the chest. Even the muscles around the eyes can ease. That old command in Psalm 46 begins to sound less like a slogan and more like a real instruction for a whole human being: brain, breath, body, attention. So now the verse has moved from language into physiology. The chaos in the psalm is no longer only poetry on a page. It starts to sound like your nervous system in overdrive, which means the next step is not to guess whether release works, but to ask whether anyone has ever watched the body answer that command in real life. That question has a real answer, and it is one of the reasons this verse keeps opening wider the closer you look at it. Years ago, Herbert Benson at Harvard described something he called the relaxation response. He was watching what happens when a person deliberately shifts out of strain, and what showed up was not one tiny change in one corner of the body. It was a pattern. Heart rate began to ease down. Breathing slowed. Muscles released their hold. The whole system started receiving the same message at once. That matters for Psalm 46 because the command sits in the middle of upheaval and answers it with release. Once you hear Rapha that way, the body's response starts sounding less accidental. When you stop bracing, your body does not shrug and say, "I'm not sure what to do with that." It knows. It has an answer built in. Benson simply gave that answer a name. And there is something comforting about that, especially if you have ever felt disappointed in yourself for not being able to pray your way out of tension by force. Many people treat peace like a performance. They try to get their words right, their posture right, their thoughts lined up in a neat row. Meanwhile, their stomach is tight, their neck feels like a cable pulled hard, and their breathing is short and quick. The verse is heading in a different direction. It is asking for a release your whole body can join. You can even feel the beginning of it before anything dramatic happens. The mouth softens, the forehead lets go. The weight in the mattress starts to register again. That is one reason this old line has lasted. It speaks to something your body already understands, even when your mind is still trying to manage the room. But Benson's work also presses the next question. If that response can be invited on purpose, then how do you actually invite it? What do you do, in the dark, with the covers cool at your feet and your thoughts still moving, when you want to obey the command without turning it into one more thing to fail at? And that is where one small change in your breathing starts to matter more than most people realize. That small change is easy to miss because most people think calm begins with taking in more air. But the turning point is often on the way out. In the logic of this verse, that makes perfect sense. If Rapha means loosen, then the body will understand the command most clearly in an exhale. Try to picture the difference. A short, quick breath keeps everything perched up high, ribs lifted, throat a little narrow, chest doing all the work. A slower breath that drops lower into the diaphragm feels different in the body. The belly moves, the shoulders stop trying to help, and when the exhale runs a little longer than the inhale, the whole system starts getting the same message Benson was talking about. You can stand down now. The room has not changed. The bills are still on the counter. The conversation from earlier has not been rewritten. But your body is not receiving all of it as an emergency. That is one of the most practical doors hidden inside this verse. You do not begin by wrestling your thoughts into a corner. You begin by changing the air. Inhale gently. Then let it leave more slowly than it came in. Within a few breaths, many people can feel the edges of the storm start to soften. The heartbeat loses a little of its pounding feel. The jaw loosens. The mattress feels more real under the back. Even the mind, which a minute ago was snapping from thought to thought, starts to drift toward those calmer rhythms we talked about earlier. And here the verse becomes wonderfully specific. It is not only a religious sentence to admire, it is a move you can make with your own lungs, your own ribs, your own tired body in the dark. Still, there is a second half to the line, and it matters just as much as the first. The psalm does not stop at "be still." It keeps going. It says, "and know." So if the first movement is release, What kind of knowing shows up after the exhale lengthens and you let go of the grip? That word know is where many people slip without realizing it. We hear it like a fact to agree with, as if the verse means calm down, then remind yourself of a true statement. But the language underneath it reaches for something warmer, closer, almost touchable. The Hebrew word is yada, and yada is not the kind of knowing you use for a password, a date on a calendar, or the name of a highway you drive every week. It is the kind of knowing that comes through contact, through familiarity, through being with. You know the weight of your own house key in your palm. You know the smell of rain coming through a cracked window. You know by experience when someone you love walks into the room, even before they speak. That is the flavor of the word. So this command is moving in two steps at once. First, release the inner strain. Then, in that open space, recognize. Not because you argued your way there, not because you finally stacked enough right thoughts in the right order, because the noise dropped enough for you to notice what was already present. That is a very different reading from the one most of us inherited, and suddenly the line becomes much more intimate. It is not only a command for public chaos or for some dramatic life crisis. It reaches right into the private places, the kitchen after a hard conversation, the parked car after bad news, the edge of sleep when your mind starts replaying everything. In those moments, the be still and know command is not asking you to become impressive. It is inviting you to become available. But there is still a snag here, and you can probably feel it already. Part of you hears all this talk of release and thinks, that sounds nice, but if I loosen my grip, won't I fall behind? Won't I miss something? Won't things get worse if I stop pushing? And that fear is exactly why this verse is harder and more honest than it first appears. That fear is not small. For many people, it is the whole engine. The tension feels useful. The inner pressure feels responsible. You keep one part of yourself wound tight because it seems like the only thing standing between you and chaos. If you stop rehearsing, maybe you will forget something. If you stop scanning, maybe you will get hurt. If you stop pushing, maybe everything will slide. So when this psalm says release, it can sound almost reckless at first. But think about where the line lives. It does not appear in a life that is already neat and safe. It arrives with roaring water, shaking ground, a world that feels unstable. That is exactly why the command has weight. It is not speaking to a person who has no reason to tense up. It is speaking to the one who does. And it is saying that your tightness is not the same thing as your strength. You know this in your body, even if you have never said it out loud. There is a kind of effort that helps you lift, build, decide, and move. Then there is the other kind. The one that keeps your teeth pressed together while you stare at the ceiling. The one that makes your prayer feel like work done under fluorescent lights. The one that keeps the nervous system revving long after the moment has passed. That strain promises control, but often it just keeps you stuck in the storm state. Here, the old command turns tender and demanding at the same time. It asks you to stop confusing vigilance with peace. It asks you to stop treating exhaustion like faithfulness. It asks you, in a very practical way, to loosen your grip, even when part of you insists that gripping is the holiest thing you can do. And once you see that, another detail starts to matter. If the mind keeps reaching for control by grabbing every thought that passes through, then release cannot mean winning a fight against thinking. It has to mean something gentler, something repeatable, especially when the thoughts keep coming anyway. That gentler move is the part many people never learn. When a thought comes in, your first instinct is usually to grab it. You follow it down the hallway. You add one more memory to it, one more fear, one more imaginary conversation. And before long, the whole room inside you is loud again. The verse is teaching another response. You notice the thought, and you do not climb into it. Here, the body and the mind meet in a very plain way. The cortex keeps generating images, plans, fragments, reminders. That is what a living mind does. You do not need to panic just because thinking continues. And deep lower systems in the brain will keep scanning for unfinished business if you feed them alarm. So the practice hidden inside this command is simple, but it is not easy. When a thought rises, do not wrestle it to the floor. Let it pass without fastening your whole body to it. Keep the jaw loose, keep the breath low, stay with the longer exhale. That is how you begin to know by experience what the verse is saying. Release is not a dramatic moment where every thought disappears. More often, it feels like this. A worry comes up, and you stop giving it your full weight. A memory stirs, and you do not build a house for it. Your ribs soften into the bed. Your tongue stops pressing against your teeth. The body learns that attention can return without force. In that kind of repetition, the mind has room to drift out of its hard, bright edge and toward quieter patterns. If you have ever tried to pray by arguing with your own thoughts, you already know how exhausting that is. This asks for something else. You are not trying to win against the mind. You are teaching it where to rest. And once that begins, even faintly, another question starts to rise. If you stop treating every thought like an emergency, what is left underneath all that mental motion when the room finally grows spacious? What is left is often much quieter than people expect, and that is why they miss it. They are waiting for fireworks, some grand feeling, some sudden burst that proves something holy has arrived. But this verse points you toward a different kind of certainty, the kind that does not shout. When the breath settles and you stop feeding every thought, there can come a moment when awareness feels simple again. You notice the cool sheet against your ankle. You hear the house making its tiny night sounds. The forehead is not pulled tight. The mind is awake, but it is not clawing at everything. In that space, the second half of the line starts to make sense. You do not just think about God from a distance. You begin to know by experience, in the small and direct way the word has always carried. That matters because many people have been taught to chase spiritual certainty the same way they chase control. Harder, faster, louder. More words, more effort, more inner pressure. But the movement here goes another way. Release first, recognition second. The knowing is less like solving a puzzle and more like stepping into a room where someone was already present before you opened the door. This is also why the command can feel so personal. It is not addressed only to crowds, nations, disasters, history out there somewhere. It reaches you where panic gets private, in the body, in attention, in the breath, in the hidden place where you decide over and over what deserves your grip. And once you begin to see that, the be still and know command stops sounding like wall art and starts sounding almost surgical. It is cutting away a false idea of strength. Still, hearing that is one thing. Doing it when the thoughts are quick and sticky is something else. Because the moment you try this for real, you run into the most ordinary obstacle of all. Your own next thought, arriving right on cue, asking for your full attention. That is the moment where this either becomes real for you or stays a nice idea. Because the next thought always comes dressed like an important one. It says, "Don't forget tomorrow," or "You need to figure this out right now," or "If you were really trusting God, you wouldn't feel this way." And if you are not careful, you grab it before you even notice your hand has closed. Your stomach tightens again. The breath climbs back into the chest. The mind starts running laps. So here, the verse has to become practice. When the thought shows up, you do something very small and very deliberate. You notice it, you name it if you need to: worry, memory, planning, shame. Then you loosen around it. You do not chase it down the hall. You do not shove it away either. You let go of the grip and you return to the body. Feel the sheet under your forearm. Feel the pillow under your jaw. Let the exhale run long and unhurried. Give the body time to remember the relaxation response it already knows how to enter. That return matters more than people think. You are training attention, yes, but you are also teaching your whole inner world that every thought does not get to seize the wheel. Some can pass like headlights moving across the ceiling and then disappearing. Some can come and go without becoming a command. This is how the be still and know command begins to move from inspiration into muscle memory. And after a few rounds of that, something subtle often happens. The thought still exists, but it has lost some of its heat. The body is no longer obeying it as if it were an alarm bell. The mind begins to settle into a quieter gear again. You are still there. Awake, aware, open, which means you are finally standing right at the edge of the thing most people skip. The simple tonight practice that turns all of this from explanation into experience. So here is the practice, plain and simple, the way you could actually use it tonight. When the room is dim and the day starts knocking again, do not argue with it. Lie down or sit where your back can soften. Let your hands open. Breathe low enough that the belly moves a little. Let the inhale come in gently and make the exhale longer, unforced, easy, just a little longer on the way out. Then stay there. When the next thought arrives, and it will, notice it without climbing aboard. Return to the exhale. Return to the weight of your body in the chair or the bed beneath your shoulders. Return again. That is how this old command becomes flesh. Psalm 46 begins with collapse and noise, then gives one small instruction that runs straight through language, breath, and body. Rapha, release. Benson gave one name to the body's answer, the relaxation response. The mind eases out of its hard, fast rhythm. The body follows. And in that clearing, the second half of the line stops being theory. You know by experience, the way you know warm water on your hands or dawn beginning at the edge of a curtain. That line in Psalm 46 verse 10 does not ask you to become a quieter machine. It asks you to stop pulling so hard. And sometimes, the holiest moment is smaller than people expect. A jaw unclenching, a long breath leaving, a thought passing by without being fed. After a while, the house sounds different. The boards settle. The air feels cooler at the doorway. Somewhere beyond the window, the dark is still dark, but it is not pressing against you in the same way. If this kind of study is helping you hear familiar words with fresh ears, there is more waiting in the description. And if you want to keep going, stay with the next one.